Today, I would like to present a video conversation with Helena Rubinstein, who is leading the behavioral science team in Innovia Technology. Helena has a doctorate in social psychology from the University of Cambridge. In Innovia, she uses behavioral science to create and design products and services that meet people's needs better and that are more intuitive to use. I learned Helena in one of the networking events in London this year, and I was really impressed by the projects that Innovia is working on and how behavioral science is implemented there. Helena, thank you a lot for your time and the opportunity to have this conversation today. For me, behavioral science is the area that is developing very fast in the recent years. I'm really inspired to see that behavioral science has many different applications in business, including product innovation. Could you please tell us a few words about your background in behavioral science and how you implemented behavioral science in your projects?
My background is in social psychology, and much of behavioral science and behavioral economics thinking has emerged from social psychology. So although behavioral science, I think, has expanded to cover more things, that's where it started. But also in my earlier life, I worked in advertising and ran a brand consultancy where a huge amount of one's thinking is around what do people do, how do you persuade them to do different things. So I found myself thinking that the rigor and the systematic and structured approach taken from social psychology would be useful to be applied in more commercial settings. So that was sort of where it all started. When I came to Innovia, which is an innovation consultancy based in Cambridge, which particularly approaches innovation problems from what we describe as an holistic perspective. So we'd have technical people, scientists, designers, engineers, and in the instance of my team, the behavioural scientists, all working together to solve a problem. It's a very natural way to think about designing new products and services, is to think not only about can it technically be done, but will people accept it or understand it? Is it meeting their needs? And so that's how we use behavioural science here.
Okay, thank you. I see that this fast development in the area of behavioral science is also linked with the fact that there are quite different understanding of what is behavioral science about. Could you please share your vision on behavioral science in terms of its implementation in consumer behavior research?
I have personally become quite alarmed that behavioural economics, as it's more often referred to, has become a sort of list of people's cognitive biases, and everything you pick up is a description of here's another bias. Aren't people silly? They're not rational. They don't behave in sensible ways. We can take advantage of these irrational and illogical behaviours by understanding these biases. And I think that when you see things in the popular press, that's where the focus has been. And my belief is that's not only inappropriate, but it doesn't do justice to what behavioural science is capable of doing. So first of all, I'm irritated by the fact that people are constantly being described as rather stupid and irrational, because people do things for perfectly sensible reasons. So I think we're being unkind, if you like, to the human race in that way. But also it lacks any kind of theoretical underpinning or understanding of the sort of mental model that's going on below it. So if you go back to its beginnings in social psychology, and I think particularly also in areas of health psychology, where when you're looking at a behaviour and if you want to change behaviour, you want to try and understand what the decision-making process is, and that will have, rational components, it will have emotional components, there will be social components. There are things you need to think about what that process is, and what's the sort of theory underlying it that will direct you to where you can intervene in the most effective way. A lot of this work that's going on in the kind of the commercial sector has not gotten beyond the cognitive biases. There's no understanding what the theories are, or how to evaluate them, or how to use them, or how to test them. And for me, without the underlying theory or model, you could be doing anything. It might be right, it might be wrong, who knows.
Yeah, I also said that there are two different terms which are very frequently used now: behavioral economics, as you mentioned, and behavioral science. Do you see any differences between these two terms?
Well, I think, I did economics originally, but my understanding of behavioral economics in its pure sense is that it's applying some of the principles of psychology to the decision-making process around the economic and financial area. So it's using a small proportion of our understanding about how people respond to rewards and incentives, how they respond to risk, how they make decisions in that narrow area. But if you think about all the things that behavioral science could be, it could take from economics, it could take from anthropology, it could take from social psychology, it could take from health psychology. There's anything to do with what causes people to do something is an appropriate area for the behavioural science world to operate in. And it seems to me that the very narrowly focused taking advantage of cognitive biases, applying it to how people think about risk and reward in the economic sector is just a very tiny sliver of what it's capable of.
And if we are talking about probably a wider range of behavioral science, what do you see can be further application of behavioral science in consumer research?
How could it improve? Okay, I think this is a really interesting question. Consumer research has, for years, worked on the principle that you can ask people questions and get some answers. You can do that using Likert scales. You can show people things. You could maybe do some observational research, so get slightly into the ethnographic area. But it's got quite a limited set of tools at its disposal, if you like. And it served us reasonably well. But the problem has been that people do all this research and then they're completely astonished to discover that people don't do what they say they do in answer to the question. So, you say, do you like this product? And they say, yes, I like it a lot. And they say, will you buy it on a scale of 1 to 5? And they say, yes, I'll give it 4. I think I might buy it. And they go away and they say, that's wonderful. It proves that people really want this product. And then it crashes in the marketplace. And everybody goes, oh, I wonder how that could be. We've tested with these consumers. They're not doing what they say they will. And I think that's because if you understand the complexity of the behavioural system, there's a huge gap between intention and behaviour. There's lots of things that sort of emerge to influence you at the last minute that could change what you intended to do completely legitimately. You said you were going to buy X, you happen to walk down the aisle and see something's a bit cheaper at that moment, or somebody's told you some new piece of information which changes your mind at the last minute, or you just forget, or I don't know, it could be anything. But you have to understand the environment and the context in which all these decisions are being made. So what I think the behavioural science approach can allow you to do is to figure out in a more kind of systematic way what all the influences could be on that behaviour, and say, well, we can influence on a number of different levels. It isn't just telling people. It isn't just giving them a nice piece of communication and hoping that they'll respond to it. Maybe there's 3 or 4 things we have to do simultaneously to influence that behaviour, knowing that even then at the last minute people will not necessarily do what they say they do, but at least you're giving it a better chance of translating that intention into some sort of behaviour.
Exactly what you mentioned in your paper, do people do what we'll say we will do, where you outline 4 important reasons why people behave differently from what we mentioned during the consumer research. Could you please share a bit more perspective on the key outlines which you mentioned in the paper?
Okay, I'll try and remember them. You might have to remind me. I mean, I think that one of the reasons is kind of goes back to exactly what I just said, is that if you don't understand the full behavioural context in which things are happening, you might be focusing on only one part of it, or even on the wrong things. It's quite common for people to get distracted by an interesting, what I call a factoid, something that emerges in research, but it isn't a key influencer of behaviour. But you can go off on a complete the wrong direction really, just because you've got distracted by something. I can give you an interesting example of that. We did some research about a year ago, talking to people about why they weren't complying with their drug regime. One of the things that had emerged in earlier research that the particular client had collected was that people had said they got what they described as pill fatigue, and they didn't like taking pills. So this somehow translated itself into well, if people don't like pills, maybe we could make it into a liquid or a gel, some way of taking this product in a different way. When we applied our behavioural models to it, what we discovered was that people weren't saying that at all. They were actually saying that they didn't like medicines because it conflicted with their identity, their personal self-identity as a sort of healthy person. And so taking any medicine made them feel that they were ill and they didn't want to take it. It didn't matter what the format was. So, you can get utterly distracted by some irrelevant information if you don't have a context or a framework in which to evaluate the information you're getting. So theories and models really matter. I think another thing that I noticed was that people very rarely conduct research to refute anything. They do it to confirm existing prejudices. So you end up doing lots and lots of research that you've done previously. There's no hypotheses there. You're not trying to test anything. You're just repeating what you've done previously. So kind of a healthy skepticism is really, really important, I think. And in a sense, to use the classic scientific method, to look at what the theory and evidence says, to generate some hypotheses, to develop interventions that will allow you to work out whether you can change things, and then to test them. And that sort of very logical approach is not always applied in consumer research.
Just thinking about the different research tools which we can use, because I agree with you that in many cases we apply only 2 free research tools constantly, like doing focus groups, habits and attitudes research, and some individual interviews or some in-store conversations. But do you think that there are some other research methods which are underused but can provide bigger value for the companies?
I think people think that ethnographic research has obviously been in the mix for a long time, but I think people get hung up on the notion that it's small scale and therefore can't be helpful. So they don't do it enough, and they don't do it in enough detail, if you like, to really get under the skin of what's going on. I still think that's incredibly valuable. Observation can be, but observation coded up in a structured and rigorous way is much more helpful than just general observation, because again we tend to go back to our confirm what we already believe rather than look for something that we haven't seen before. I think that using the data, and this is quite an academic approach really, but we have talked about this, using the data to build the model of behaviour. So if you don't have an underlying model, say, well, what does that lead us to believe? What the decision-making processes would help quite a lot. I think doing more of what I'd call test, learn, adapt type research. So, you have a hypothesis, you want to see if this works, do it quickly to find out whether it does, if it doesn't move on, if it does, modify and move forwards. That sort of thing I think should be used a lot more by companies. It's much more agile and it's much more effective.
Yeah. In your paper, you highlighted the importance of taking a holistic approach in order to understand consumer behavior. You mentioned that it should include emotional, social, and cultural drivers of the behavior. How do you think it can be realized in the research setting?
Yeah, it's with difficulty. I think this is not. It's not all about primary research either. I think we go back a lot to what the academic literature says, what the anthropological, for example, cultural. If you're looking at the culture, you might be looking in all sorts of places at the culture. You might be looking at communications in the culture. You might be looking at standing on the street corner watching what's going on. You might be reading papers about it. So I think it's more than just asking the consumer what they think, because especially if you're dealing in areas of new and innovative products and services, which we do, and we start with very early stage innovation before it's even got to the product stage. If you ask a consumer, do they like this or not like this, how would they know? They've never seen it before. It's very hard to get a good read. So you're having to bring in lots of different aspects. What do we think the underlying model might be? What do we think, and the anthropologists might say about this? All these kinds of things. Plus, of course, we've got access to, if you're talking about a new technical product, we need to figure out not only how it will work, but what would make it intuitive and easy for somebody to use. So there's all of that will go on simultaneously. It's a parallel process that's happening.
Exactly, yeah, this is very vital. Probably you can share a bit of insights on kind of research methodologies, research tools that can be used in the early stage of the product innovations.
We will do a number of things. So, for example, I'll give you an example of something we did recently to try and crystallize this. We were asked to think about how to improve the experience of boarding at the gate, because that's a pain point for people waiting to get on planes. And it meant, and what the client was looking for was a series of new approaches to helping people to board more easily, but also to board more quickly, because for every minute a plane is on the ground when it should be flying in the air is money lost, basically. So in order to kind of get into the heads of the consumer, the passenger, we did all sorts of things. We followed people around airports and watched what they were doing and the process they were going through. We gave some people in this company travel a lot, so we gave them a questionnaire where it wasn't really a questionnaire, it was a kind of on the journey score from 0 to 10, whether it was a good part of the experience or a bad part of the experience, so we could identify pain points and figure out what was going on. We looked at academic literature on how people feel about queuing. We looked at decision-making processes for getting people through things quickly, all sorts of different range of techniques. And from that, we developed a model of the things that we could influence. And it turned out to be some fairly simple things. We could influence the environment, we could change the sort of information people got, and we could reduce people's anxiety. And doing that, we could develop all sorts of different approaches at the gate. And remember, what we would always say is we've got to do more than one thing. So we tested out all sorts of different things, and it has been put into test in one of the airports in the United States. And not only has it made the experience a more pleasant one for the passenger, but we've taken 4 minutes off the boarding time. So that sort of approach is very multifaceted, and every problem is different. So I can't give you a kind of checklist that says you should always do this. I think what you need to think about is what's been done before, because somebody somewhere will have had this problem. So, is there an analogous situation we can learn from? Is there extant literature out there that we can look at? Has the client already done some research on it that you can look at? And then augment that with the kind of other things that you need to put together, so that eventually you get a model of the behaviour that's going on that you want to influence.
Yeah, I really admire your approach that you are combining academic learnings with some practical business understanding. And this is what the core intention of my blog, actually. Could you please provide a bit of your experience on how can this be achieved, the perfect combination of these two types of learnings? Because a lot of times when you work, I worked in the industry for 5 years, and every time I came to my manager with the idea to take something from the academic learnings, it was something scary. So it's something very far from the reality. It's not what we are really interested in. Just do what is happening on the ground. And sometimes it's really difficult to convince people in the business that there are a lot of great ideas that exist in the academia and that can be reapplied in the real world. How do you do it?
I think you may just have been unfortunate in the part of this industry that you were in, because we just routinely will go to the academic literature as a starting point, and that's partly because we're often working with R&D teams and innovation teams who are highly technical, and so they will be doing that routinely anyway for part of their work. So it's not odd to them; that would be quite normal. But also, we will just assert that, you know, somewhere very often so talk about, you know, the problem I was just describing earlier about adherence to taking your drug regime. That's very well documented in academia. People have looked over and over again about how can we get people to take their medicines correctly. So they have already been using psychological models to figure out why people do and don't take their medicines. Why would we want to invent a new one? So we just say, well, we're going to start there. If it's appropriate, we'll think about that, and the clients go fine. So we've never had a problem, but I think that may just be because the parts of the organisation we work with are more open to it.
Yeah, I think this is the difference between R&D and marketing, because in marketing, when you come with some academic learnings, often you have the feedback that it's very generalized, it's very different from the situation in the market.
We're getting through to marketing people, and I'm finding that more and more marketing people are aware of behavioural science and they're interested in it. Now, there is a danger that they will grab the sort of surface bits and not use it in a very detailed way. But I think that there are certainly the people I've spoken to are a bit more open to it because they've seen us use it in other parts of the business and gone, that's actually quite interesting. Perhaps we can use it as well. And if it's a very complex marketing problem or an area that they've not worked in before, it gives them a structure and a framework which is more evidence-based than they've had previously, so it helps them to make the case for why they should do this and not that.
Okay.
So I agree with you, it's hard, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I just thinking what can be the best combination for you. As far as I understand, you are taking academic learnings and academic understanding as a background. And when you apply some additional business understanding, additional learning of the particular consumers from the ad hoc research. Am I right?
Yes. Or we will sometimes do additional new research of our own. I mean, one of the things that I always say is that most of our clients are drowning in data. They have more data than you can possibly imagine. And what we would always suggest is that we take a look at that first before we ever do any new research, because hiding in their data bank somewhere is probably something that's relevant, but they've not been looking for it. So it's worth starting there and starting with anything that's in the academic literature before you even think about doing additional research, and it's a much more efficient way to work.
I absolutely agree with you. Probably the last question. How do you think Consumer Insights team members and their business partners can keep an open mind for the insights generation? This is what you mentioned in your paper, that we always should keep an open mind for the generating insights, because sometimes we are just so narrow-minded by our current understanding of the business. But from the other side, I personally also had such kind of experience when you come to your team members who are even more experienced, have very clear understanding of what's happening in the business. It's really hard to drive them to open these boundaries and to be more open to new ideas, to new insights.
Well, I think this is, funny enough, where external suppliers are really helpful, actually, because they automatically come with an external perspective, a new perspective. It's very, very hard to, when a team of people have been working together for a long time, they get into a kind of group thing. This is how we do things around here. This is what, these are all the myths and the sacred cows that have built up over a long period. So I think when there's a difficult problem that people are trying to solve, it's really helpful to get some sort of external perspective. But I think the other thing goes back to what I was saying about the scientific method, actually, which is that challenge yourself to say, if I define the problem in a particular way, what are my hypotheses about how various things are working, and can I test them? And that's the thing we don't do often enough. But we test things and write things in such a way to just do what we've always done. But if you develop a series of hypotheses and say, I'm not sure whether this is really going to be the case or not, then maybe you will actually be able to conduct some experiments which allow you to figure out whether they're true.
Right.
Not easy to challenge yourself.
Yeah, it's really not easy, because when you come to some ideas, even from the recent surveys, and you try to communicate something not expected, or something that is really difficult in terms of decision making, it's hard to drive this open mind perception of the insights.
But it also, I think there's certain points, if you like, in the cycle where it becomes more evident. So if a product or brand is stalled and it's not growing at the pace that you think it is, or if it's being challenged by some disruptor in the marketplace, that's the time when you really need to challenge yourself and everybody else. When things are going well, people get complacent and don't bother. But so there's certain opportunities when I think you can intervene because you have to.
Yeah. Okay, thank you a lot for this valuable insights and sharing your experience across different projects. I highly appreciate it. Thank you a lot, and I hope we'll stay in touch.
Okay, thank you very much.